Hello, world. Yes, indeed. Hello, world. Good morning. Namaste. Nisam Bulavinaka from Sydney, Australia. I am Sashi Singh, and welcome once again to Sashi Singh's Talking Point on this Sunday morning. In episode 20 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point program today, we will shortly be joined by our regular correspondent, Nikhil Singh, to discuss news and events from Fiji and Australia, and then a special review on the Australian elections that came to an end yesterday. I must inform all my viewers this afternoon that today we do not have a chief guest. It has not been for lack of trying on my part. There was a chief guest lined up, and I was waiting for a confirmation from my chief guest. When I received the written confirmation earlier this week, I was waiting for a photograph so that we could prepare our poster trailer. And that photograph did not turn up. When I finally phoned our chief guest in Fiji to follow up, our chief guest then said to me that he was busy and he could not take part in Sunday's program, and if I could schedule him for some other day. So there you go. I lost a chief guest. As they say, one can try and try only. And as the old adage goes, you can take a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. My sincere apologies to my dedicated viewers who may have, as always, expected a robust discussion with a chief guest. However, all is not lost. I thought that despite not having a chief guest this week, we could do something different. Today, you, the viewers, can be the chief guests. Why don't you raise the subjects that you believe is the most important topic for you personally? If you are in Fiji, tell us what your thoughts are, concerns, and predictions are as Fiji heads for the general elections. And don't forget, Fiji's elections could be anytime as soon as in July or as late as January 2023. If you are in Australia, what are your thoughts about last night's election results? Did your party win the election? Were you surprised by the performance of the independent candidates? What would you like to see the newly elected government do as a matter of priority? Share your thoughts and views, and Nikhil and I will try our best to share these with you live during our program today. We can have an interactive session via the comment section of SSTP, and if we have enough interaction, we will continue with the show. If there's no interaction, we'll call it quits and we'll have an early Sunday afternoon off. Shortly after we speak with Nikhil, I will also play an interview that ABC Radio conducted with a gentleman by the name of Hendrik de Wachter, who has been granted permanent residency in Australia on the basis of seeking asylum from Fiji. That is an interview coming up shortly. That was done by the ABC Radio, and we credit ABC Radio for that. Welcome once again to Sashi Singh's Talking Point, a program with a bit of difference today, and it is entirely up to you how you interact with this show this morning. And as I look at the viewership, Eli Levula, Nimbula Vinaka Kemini, thank you very much. He's watching SSTP. Ashwin Kumar, you would have heard me say there is no chief guest today. But yes, next week is a big one. I've just got off the phone about 10 minutes ago, and I have it confirmed who our next guest is going to be. It's a big one, making a reappearance on SSTP, and I will reveal that name before we sign off this afternoon. Charanjit Singh, a politician, is also watching. Mr. Singh, welcome to the program. Hopefully one day we can talk to you as well on SSTP. And Milika Nasilivata, Nisayandravinaaka Milika, she says, I'm absolutely enjoy watching your interviews. Fiji remains in dictatorship and denies its citizens of free and fair elections, freedom of expression and speech, and you really killed those interviews with your very genuine questions. Blessed Sunday to you. Well, Monica, we try, and we've also tried to invite the Fiji First government via its representatives, the Attorney General, or even the Prime Minister, or ministers of members of Parliament to appear on this program. The discretion is theirs. My invitation stands. Well, we'll come back to some of the comments and we will try to do this interactive program with you. But as always, we begin today's program, episode 20 of SSTP, with a warm welcome to our regular contributor, former Fiji TV journalist Nikhil Singh, to tell us of the key happenings of the political week in Fiji and in Australia. Nikhil, welcome to SSTP and a very good morning to you. You must have celebrated long into the night with the Labour Party's victory in the Australian federal elections. Let's begin as usual. How are you feeling this morning?
Very well, Sashi. Good to be with you. And I understand the guest uh, um reneged in the 11th hour. But as they say, the show must go on.
Indeed, indeed, the show must go on. And with that, let us begin as always with news from Fiji. Nikhil, in recent months, the price of flour, sugar, and other staples has increased, not forgetting the cost of fuel. Now, this really has hit the ordinary Fijians quite hard. Now, has a Fiji First government minister added salt to the wounds of the suffering people by making what is being termed as insensitive comments?
Sashi, we have reported previously on this program the rising cost of sugar, flour, the staples, rice. You've noted fuel. I want to also add to the list bus fares. All of this has added misery of those already suffering in Fiji. Let's not forget that some economists have stated that poverty level is sitting at somewhere around 40%, probably higher, as they say, after the pandemic hit. Now, talking about adding salt to the wounds of those suffering, Fiji First Government Minister Dr. Mahendra Reddy has come out and said, and I quote, "Rising food prices will have little effect on you and your family if you are willing to make adjustments. Households must learn to make adjustments." As reported in Fiji Village, Reddy went on to say that if during the COVID 19 pandemic people complained that the bundles of beans were $8, they need to make adjustments to consume those agricultural produce, which are less expensive. And while supply resumes and prices go down, you can then resume consumption of those items, including bundles of beans. The National Federation Party says it is a shocking display of insensitivity. Dr. Mahendra Reddy is telling the public that they won't feel the impacts of the rising cost of food prices if we just make adjustments. The party says the minister is telling people to make adjustments to spending while at the same time receiving an annual salary of 148,000. The party president, Pio Tiko Duandua, in a tweet said, and I quote, "Reddy gets picked up and dropped off in a ministerial vehicle paid for by you, taxpayers, and gets a salary of $148,000. Reddy does not have to make adjustments, Sashi."
Yes, well, it is so easy for someone to say that people have to make adjustments and that poverty level, some even say, is as high as 50%. Now, Nikhil, a video of a police officer allegedly assaulting a bus driver in Lambasa went viral last week. This alleged incident has caused some confusion between the police and the Director of Public Prosecutions. What do you have on this?
Sashi, according to a police statement last week, almost immediately after the video of the alleged incident went viral on social media, the bus driver in question was charged with one count of failure to give name and address under a section of the Criminal Procedure Act 2009 and one count of serious assault under one of the sections of the Crimes Act 2009 for allegedly assaulting the officer during the execution of his duties. However, when the bus driver appeared in the magistrate's court in Lambasa, the serious assault charge was withdrawn. The accused is now on bail. The police officer who is alleged to have assaulted the bus driver has been suspended from duties from the force pending an investigation. Now, Sashi, what is also surfaced is in the case of this, in this matter, there is conflicting views between the police and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Police had said in a statement that the bus driver had been charged with one count of failure to give name and address and one count of serious assault. The statement said that the charges were sanctioned following consultations with the Office of the Director of DPP in Lambasa. The Office of the DPP, however, said they were unaware of consultations with the police in Lambasa and had not sanctioned any charges against the bus driver. So we have a claim from the police, which has been denied by the Office of the DPP. The police have come out again after that and said they stand by their comments and statement, Sachi.
Yes, indeed. I watched that viral video, and one of our guests, Lenora Ngerengere Tambua, actually was on that bus as well, and she also intervened. That is a story that we will need to follow and see what conclusions comes out of it. I do remember the bus driver's lawyer is Ami Kohli, and Kohli said in court this week that the wrong person is actually standing in court, meaning that the police officer ought to have been there as well, I guess. Well, Nikhil, the National Federation Party has ruled out a coalition with the ruling party, Fiji First. The NFP has signed a memorandum of understanding with the Sitiveni Rambuka led People's Alliance Party and are working in partnership as they head into the elections this year. What have you got on this for us?
Well, Sashi, there is a MOU or a partnership arrangement between the People's Alliance and the NFP. Both parties have been seen campaigning together. They've been holding rallies where we've seen both the leaders of the respective parties together. In April, the NFP leader Biman Prasad told Fiji Times that the NFP and the People's Alliance Party would allow other opposition parties to join the coalition after the elections. Last week, the Fiji Times reported that the NFP will not form a coalition or a partnership with the Fiji First Party, according to its leader, Biman Prasad. And Prasad made the comments while speaking at a party meeting in Malolo in Nandi on Monday last week. And he said, I quote, the NFP doesn't want to partner with a party that has brought the country to its knees. He also said the party had decided to work with the People's Alliance Party for now. Now, as you are aware, under the electoral laws, Sashi, parties cannot contest as a coalition. The question that I think NFP or any other party for that matter needs to answer is, will they form a coalition with the Fiji First to form government should these parties, including Fiji First, fail to attain a majority? I refer to Fiji First because they are the ruling party currently. I think the only party that has come out categorically stating that they will not work with the Fiji First is the Fiji Labour Party, Sashi.
And talking of which, the Fiji Labour Party has called on the Electoral Commission to investigate the Attorney General. Now, what has prompted this call?
Well, last week, the FLP leader Mahendra Chaudhry and former Prime Minister released a statement saying, and I quote, it is a blatant case of abuse of authority for the Attorney General to be campaigning its specially organized prefect inductions at primary and secondary schools in the various parts of the country. He went on to say further, he is not the education minister, so in which capacity is he parading himself before our school children, short of campaigning for votes at the public expense? His involvement in addressing these gatherings is being questioned by many school management committees. On Friday, the Attorney General was at the Natamore High School in Lotoka, which is my former high school, officiating at the prefect's inductions ceremony. Sachi, Chowdhury has now called on the Electoral Commission to investigate the Attorney General and the Minister of Economy for such presence in schools, which is in effect campaigning for the next election.
All right, Nikhil, closer to home, the federal elections are finally over as millions of Australians headed to the ballot box yesterday. Voters have given their mandate to a new government in the making. After 9 years of Conservative government in Australia, a new Labor government is set to rule now. Incoming Prime Minister Albanese says the Australian people have voted for a change. He says it says a lot about their country that the son of a single mum who was a disability pensioner who grew up in a public housing down the road in Camperdown can become Australia's Prime Minister. I'm sure you've got a lot to say about last night's results, Nikhil. What do you have for us on this front?
Well, I will credit the ABC. That's where I've got the information for this morning. Sashi Elbow, as he's affectionately known, he will return Labour from the political wilderness to government, seizing power from the coalition after it has been almost a decade in office for Liberals and a decade for Labour in opposition. As you pointed out, from humble beginnings, Elbow from a housing commission has did set a path, and he will now be the 31st prime minister of this great country, Sashi.
Well, indeed. Now, I guess we could have a look at a few key seats, Nikhil. Go ahead.
Thanks, Sashi. Look, whilst Elbow has been declared the winner in the sense that he has gained a majority, well, not quite a majority. He's got 72 seats at the moment. Labor had 69 seats in the previous parliament, and the Liberals had 76 seats. So Labor is sitting at 72 at the moment. The Lib, the National Party, is sitting at 50 at the moment. I must say that these are provisional results, because what happens is you get a count on the night of the election, and then there's a recount to confirm those results. Now, whether it's going to be a majority Labor government or a minority Labor government working with the crossbenchers, that is yet to be seen. But as you pointed out, Sashi, some key seats that we can focus on, and also including in the mix, is the Teal Independents. I think the biggest upset for the Libs has been that their treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, has lost his seat in Kooyong to an independent. Similarly, in Sydney, I think this is also a point to be noted for the Liberals, that the rusted-on Liberal blue ribbon seat of Warringah, where we had the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott coming from, Zoe Staggles has won the seat again. So that is a really, um, I guess, a point to be noted for the Liberals. Similarly, when we look at the marginal, so in South Australia, Boothby, which again you could say it's a rostered on a Liberal seat, that has been lost. The Labor Party has snatched that one from the Liberals. There were a couple of seats also in Sydney that there was a strong focus on, and one of them is the seat of Reid. Labor did come very close in the last election, but wasn't successful. But this time around, we have Andrew, not Andrew, we've got Labor winning the seat of Reid. Parramatta was being termed as a seat to watch, where the Liberals were gaining ground, but they failed or they were unsuccessful, where the Labor has retained the seat of Parramatta. That's as a result of the sitting member retiring in the seat. But the other big one is, Sashi, the former Premier of New South Wales, Christina Keneally, who had entered the federal government in the upper house. She came back. She was parachuted to the seat of Fowler. Now, there's lots of questions I'm sure that'll be asked this morning. We had a pre-selection happening in the seat of Fowler, where a rank and file Labor member was pre-selected to run. However,
Fowler, by the way, Nikhil, Fowler is in my electorate. And as you said, a rank and file member of the Labour Party was selected, and that member was anointed by former Member of Parliament Chris Hayes. Please go ahead.
yes, you're right. So I was just going to mention that Chris Hayes, a very senior member of the Labor Party, had actually endorsed that candidate. However, for reasons unknown to me, the party decided to parachute Christina Keneally into that seat. And we have the results where the independent is now almost it's in the bag for her, where she will be taking out the seat of Fowler from Labour. And the seat of Fowler, I must mention, Sashi, is a for the Labour Party. It's a blue ribbon seat for Labour. They have never lost the seat. I think only for once. Could be wrong there, but that seat has gone, and it just gives the message to the party that you don't do this. You don't parachute people in the 11th hour. Somebody who is living on the North Shore, and just simply bring her into the traditional Labour seats to contest just because they want her in Parliament.
Well summarized, Nikhil. We'll let you rest for a couple of minutes. Let me tell our viewers that today you have the opportunity of sharing your comments with us. As I said in the introduction, you can be our chief guest for today. Our chief guest, we don't have one today. Our chief guest told me very late in the week that he was not available. So why don't you raise the subjects that you believe is the most important topics for you? If you are in Fiji, tell us what your thoughts, concerns, and predictions are as Fiji heads for the general elections. And as I said, if you're in Australia, what are your thoughts with the election results? Did your party win the election? And what would you like to see the newly elected government do as a priority? Nikhil, I actually have something to share with you. I went to try to get my voter registration card for the Fiji elections. I tried to go and get that changed. And that was an experience for me as well. The registration place was at the Green Valley Mosque in Wilson Road, not far from where I am. And I left disappointed because I couldn't re register. One of the requirements was that I needed a passport, and I took my passport, but my passport had expired. I only took out my Fiji passport the night before, and then I realized it had expired. And when they checked my registration details from my old green voter's card, everything matched up. But because I did not have a valid passport, and there were about another three people behind me with the same problems, we could not register. So the Fiji Elections Office staff got me to sign the form. They took my photograph and they've said, get your passport and email us the biodata page. But my point being that a passport is a travel document. Because I have an expired passport, it does not mean that I've given up the citizenship of the country. So that's a point I tried to make. Unfortunately, they didn't accept that, so I couldn't register. And now I've got to go to the trouble of ensuring that I get my passport done if I want to vote in the Fijian elections. So just my thought. And today, of course, at the Joachim Church in Lidcombe, they are doing registrations all day. So if you're in Sydney, make sure you have a valid passport. They don't accept your driving license, Fiji driving license. They don't accept your birth certificate. They only want you to produce your valid blue passport. That's the Fijian passport, Nikhil.
Well, this is the case, actually. There's so much confusion because you're not the only person who's told me about this, I guess, issue. I've had a number of friends who have mentioned as well when they've rocked up similarly um, to register that they have not taken note of their passport being expired. The point you make is that the passport is a travel document, it's a legal document, but I think this is purely on the Fiji Elections Office. They should clarify and make it known that you've got to have a valid. Well, when I say valid, you've got to have a passport that is in current and not expired. So there is a lot of confusion around this, Sashi. Hopefully that matter can be resolved. I think it's quite petty that you cannot have a say in the democratic process in Fiji if your passport is expired.
Well said. Now, viewers, at this juncture, I would like to play you an interview That was conducted by ABC Radio in Australia, and that interview was with Hendrik de Wachter, who has been granted asylum status here in Australia. So we'll play this short interview for you and get some semblance of what happened with Hendrik de Wachter, a Fiji citizen who's been granted asylum in Australia. I'd like to share that. And this, of course, is with the courtesy of ABC Radio, who conducted the interview.
ABC Radio Australia.
It's been a long battle with immigration authorities, but finally former Fiji prison warden Hendrik de Wachter has been granted permanent residency in Australia. He fled from his native Fiji in 2018, together with 3 fellow wardens, all of whom claimed they would be at risk of persecution if they go back. Their claims centered around the behavior of the Corrections Service Commissioner, former naval commander and convicted killer Francis Keane. Audio tapes recorded openly by de Wachter captured outbursts by Keane using extreme homophobic language and urging his staff to bully and attack targeted prison inmates. When the recordings were made public, Keane was forced out of the World Rugby Council and eventually relinquished his position as chairman of the Fiji Rugby Union. But with the commander apparently still hovering in the background of the FRU and still very much in charge of the prison service, Hendrik de Wachter says he would be at risk if he ever went back to Fiji. Now, Australian immigration authorities have accepted his claims about persecution, but in the meantime, he's been separated from his wife and 2 young sons for a very long time.
Going on 4 years now. It's been a tough one, thanks to this advanced technology. We can actually see people face to face on this telephone and on the computer and all that. But if we were back there, we just had to send a letter back and forth like the people used to do in World War I, World War II. I think it would be pretty much a very difficult time for me. But I gave them everything through immigration in what they wanted, guaranteeing them that I was under persecution and under a big threat if I was to return to the country. I had to flee just for my protection. I had to leave my family behind, knowing that the government of the day there won't really touch them because of their political status in the international level with other countries. But working in the prison department and being in a position where I was with Francis Keane and we'd always go to formal meetings with Bain Marama and Police Commissioner Mr. Gilio, I'd see a lot of things that are not really right for current democratic government to be doing.
How hard was it to persuade the authorities that you should be granted permanent residency?
Seeking protection from Fiji was a pretty tough challenge for me because it's a democratic state and I had to try and really convince them as to why I had seek protection. With the evidence that I had convinced them that I was bound to be persecuted. I was in fear of returning for my safety personally and also for my family. With whatever I had shared with them regarding Francis Keane and the government of the day, with the evidence that I had of what they can do and also we can see on the news and what's been happening of police brutality and all that, I think it pretty much nailed the mark on giving me a protection visa and also permanent residency too.
There were 4 of you that fled from Fiji at various times for the same reason. All had been working for the prison service under Francis Keane as the Corrections Commissioner. What has happened to your 3 fellow workmates? Have they also been granted permanent residency?
Not yet, but I hope the best for them because we're pretty much on the same grounds. But just for now, it's only me that got mine and I really hope the best for the other 3.
What about the situation back in Fiji within the prison service that led to you and your colleagues fleeing the country in the first place and seeking Australian protection? Have you heard or been told anything from people back in Fiji to suggest that the situation is any better?
It's pretty much the same and it's getting worse with Francis Keane and his brutal and inhuman acts and also of his homophobic comments. He keeps on doing it and I've spoken to some of my work colleagues back at home. Nothing has changed.
And what about Francis Keane's involvement in the running of rugby in Fiji? Because, of course, the accusations that you made against him led to him effectively being forced out of the World Rugby Council, and subsequently he stood down as chairman of the Fiji Rugby Union, but I've been told on a number of occasions that he's still involved in the background. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that's pretty much true. He's still in the background, still making decisions, and now that the new rugby chairman is another Navy personnel, Humphrey Tawake. which is another Navy commander. Pretty much Francis King is still in the picture, and also the president of the rugby union, which is Bain Marama himself.
At the time when you were pushing to be allowed to stay in Australia, first of all, one of the things you said was that you were urging World Rugby to dig deeper into the background of the whole Francis King case, because in your view, the Fiji Rugby Union were not capable or would choose not to do that themselves. Are you aware that World Rugby ever completed an investigation? I know that one began, but no findings ever seem to have emerged.
Yeah, I remember in the last interview we had, I pushed with World Rugby to come down really hard on this investigation. But like you said, they said investigations had commenced, but I'm not really sure if they really dug deep or if any investigations were done. I stand to be corrected. It could have been done, but was never emerged in media to finally tell the public that, yes, investigations were done and this is the outcome of the investigation. But I was shocked to see that Francis King had stood down from his place as the chairman of the Fiji Rugby Union and also not been put in the committee for the World Rugby Board.
What does the future hold for you now that you have permanent residency here in Australia?
Coming to a foreign country and being a career path correctional officer was a big transition from being behind four corners of a prison and coming into the big city life of Australia here in Sydney. Pretty much went around all different jobs around here, from construction to landscaping, and I worked at Bunnings warehouse for a while. But for the past 1.5 years now, I've been working in disability, something I look at as related to my field, which is the prison background. But this is just looking after unfortunate people who have mental or physical disability. And I'm pretty much enjoying it. And I think I'll be making a transition from working as a correctional officer to working as something in a role in disability, provide my services to people with disability, and also being something that will be better for them. Just making them laugh or making them happy is a big goal for me.
Former Fiji prison warder Hendrik de Wachter, who fled Fiji to escape persecution and is now finally a permanent resident in Australia, speaking there to
Yes, well, indeed, that interview conducted by ABC Radio with Hendrik de Wachter in relation to his asylum status. Well, as I said at the beginning of the program, we don't have a chief guest. You are my chief guest today, our wonderful viewers. And I've given you this opportunity to share with us any concerns that you have in relation to the government in your country, as you had for elections in Fiji. Now, I'd like to acknowledge a few of our wonderful viewers. Looking, Gonerongo, Bula, Bula to you, sir. Chandrasekharan is watching as well, ex-police officer. Inspector, I believe, Chandra, thank you. Aggie O'Connor in Brisbane, I believe. Aggie Nimbula Vinaka to you as well. Eli Levula Vinaka, thank you, sir. Aparosa Ranuku is also watching. He says, Sandono SSTP. Vinavalevo Aparosa, thank you for watching. Parmesh Prasad is watching as always. Kenny Tambudhavu, Nimbula Vinaka, Kenny. And he says, Bula Vinaka, sir. Thank you, Kenny. Vijay Ram says, Namaste, same to you, sir. Devita Korandrao, Bula Mr. Singh, Devita Nimbulavinaka to you. Audrey Demoon, Bulavinaka, Sashi and team, thank you, Audrey, for your continued support for SSTP. Tamai Diana says, Bula Shashi, keep up the great work you're doing. Well, the SSTP team, including Nick Hill, we're all trying to do our best every Sunday. And a lot depends on our chief guest. But don't forget, before you go, I have a big announcement as to our chief guest for next week. Somebody who's making a reappearance on SSTP. Wanga Mbale says, Bula Sashi, thank you for standing up for free speech through your program. Wanga, thank you very much. We keep trying to do our very best. Mark Chen says, Bula Bro, Nikhil Singh. Thank you, Mark. Nikhil is watching and listening. Mr. Choi, good program, SSTP. Thank you. Satish Deb is watching. Wangambali says, surely price has gone up. As a middle income earner, previous shopping has really impacted my budget than what it used to be. Now, that's a reality. Wanga, thank you for sharing your thoughts, because the price rises obviously will have an impact. And this, of course, stems from Dr. Mahendra Reddy's comments on the cost of living, that people ought to make adjustments. And as the media has reported, that borders on insensitivity. Well, Sanmogam Gounder says, thanks, Sashi. Enjoy your program. Pretty high standard of journalism. Mr. Gounder, thank you very much. Big Swaroop is watching. Kapil Dutt from Brisbane is also watching. Bulla to you, Kapil. William David Rounds, Bulla from Simla Lotoka. That's our old hunting ground, Simla Lotoka. Nikhil, you and I are very familiar with Simla as well. Wills McCaig says, Bulla Sashi, Nikhil from the Hidden Paradise. Nimbula Vinaka Wills, thank you for being part of this. Bert Vakavengu asks, will the interim government took part before the election in Fiji? I guess, Bert, you're asking if they are going to take part in this program. Well, as I keep saying in most of the programs, my invitation went out to the Fiji First government, to the AG's office, to the Prime Minister's office, to a few ministers' office, etc., to have them appear on the program. Choice is entirely theirs. I can only deal with the cards I've got or the cards that are dealt to me. And I'd be happy to talk to them. But first of all, they've got to be happy to appear on the SSTP program. And if and when they do, the whole world will know. It will be certainly announced on this platform. Now, I'll come back to some other comments. Adish Naidu is watching. Adish, I hope you had a good round of golf, my friend. Thanks for being part of the show. Let me ask Nikhil, while I've got Nikhil, a question. Nikhil, you're quite astute at these things, politically minded, of course. Now that there's been a change in the Australian government, and Labor will head government for the next 3 years, hopefully in their own right, if not with the assistance of a few independent members. Let me ask you about the Australian-Fiji relationship with a new Labor government. How will this impact the relationship between the two countries?
Well, Sashi, I think there will be some impact on that because the High Commissioner, Australia's High Commissioner to Fiji, John Figgs, he has somewhat been quite unusual because he has, in my observation, played quite a bit in the politics, in the local politics, where he has made comments and so forth. So with a change in government, obviously they will be looking at the appointments, the diplomatic appointments that any government undertakes. Now, the other thing that I must add there is the Minister for Pacific Islands, which is the Australian Minister for Pacific Islands, Zed Selja, hoping I'm pronouncing it right. Yes. He's, as you know, he's made a couple of trips in the last maybe 3 months to Fiji. One to officiate at the opening of the military's Black Rock facility in Nadi. Now, Black Rock is something that is not seen in good light because allegedly there were tortures taking place at that facility in the aftermath of the 2006 elections. And Zed, in fact, it appears that he will lose his seat in Canberra. He's on the verge of losing his seat. So not only that there'll be diplomatic implications, but the minister himself in Australia is on the verge of losing to a very popular former rugby union legend, David Pocock. But I do want to refer our viewers to a piece that Graham Davis has written, and you can find that on his Facebook blog, where he details some of the impact that could be seen as a result of the change in government in Australia, Sashi. I want to very quickly mention, you mentioned Isaac Rounds. He is my neighbor. Chandrasekharan, you might not know, but he's also a very famous former Fiji soccer referee. In fact, he went up to become the director of referees, as I understand it.
Yes, indeed. A wonderful police officer and also a very fair-minded referee. In fact, if I'm not wrong, he was one of the FIFA referees as well. I stand to be corrected on that. But yes, I in my days during radio in Fiji, doing soccer commentaries, etc., the likes of Chandrasekharan, Mr. Nardeo Mishra, these were all very well-known soccer officials in Fiji. Coming back to our screen here, Chanel Ngoli Wasa Wasa says, Vinaka Nikhil, always very succinct and informative. Pramila Fries is watching from up north, near Bahram. Anil Kumar, Dr. Anil Kumar says, Bula Rua Rua. I do think that I have one of those blue booklets. Must check its expiry day. Thanks for that, Sash. Yes, the blue booklet, of course, is that wonderful passport of Fiji. Check on that, Doctor. Bilai says, Bulavinaka Sashio, Nim Bulavinaka B. Usaya Peter Wangaterewa says, I was working at one of the count centers last night, and boy, what a positive atmosphere to be in and being part of the democratic process that enabled a new government to be voted in. Good observation, Peter. Now, Peter, I know you're very actively involved in politics yourself, and one just hopes that the same type of counting, the same type of transparency, etc., happens in Fiji as well when Fiji goes to the polls. And Peter says Francis Keane is still traveling freely in and out of Australia and regularly drops in to watch the Fijian Drua games. Well, good luck on him. Sekope Siruvatu says, Bulasashi and Nikhil, Vinaka Sekope, thank you very much. And Ashok Chand says, we need to just kick this regime of clowns out the door. That is all. Well, Ashok, you're entitled to your opinion. And what happens is that you get that one vote. And when you get that vote, you must exercise that vote and exercise your rights. Well, let's see if there's any topics that's coming up. Nina Moreno is watching from California. Yes, hello to you, Nina. It's Saturday afternoon there, I believe. A very, very good afternoon to you. Sekope Seruvatu says, right now our priorities are family obligations, putting food on the table. Well said. Indeed, that is a concern when a country has such high levels of poverty rates, etc., and things are tough. Price of fuel, price of food going up. This is absolutely the right sort of sentiments that people will express. And when you have government ministers asking people to make adjustments, especially when a government minister is on a 140,000 plus salary, it's so easy to say, make a statement like that. Raveen Gopal says this program has given people a fair idea to whom to vote. Well, that's a choice that you will exercise, Mr. Gopal. Thank you for your comments there. Balram Raj, you were great, Shashi. Well, Balram said the world must know what's going on in Fijian donation money. Okay, I'm not really too sure, but if you're talking about people sending funds back home, well, that is in fact one of the key factors that keeps Fiji floating. Roland Lilo, our good friend Roland, is also watching Bula Vinaka, the Waihevi Mbula from Waihevi. Vinaka, Roland, I just nearly tripped there myself. Nikhil, any other updates on results that's been coming in, etc.?
No, I think, Sashi, a lot will depend on those postal ballots because, as I said, the Australian Labor Party is sitting on 72 seats. They will need more than 76 seats to form a majority government. So I think we'll have a long wait before the final results are declared. Just going back to one of the points or one of the comments made by the viewer, and you covered this on several occasions, Shashi, where we are asked on if a government representative, whether it be the Prime Minister or the Attorney General, will appear in the show. I think we'd love to hear from the viewers as to what do they think. Why are not why the Prime Minister or the Attorney General or any of the government representatives are not coming on the program? You've written to them, I know, I think more than twice, inviting them.
Well, I've got all my records, Nikhil, and maybe this show isn't the right platform for them. Let me tell my viewers we have 90,000 odd reach in terms of the SSTP reach. Those are figures released by Facebook itself. It's not a figure that I pluck from the air. So it'll be nice to hear from you, as Nikhil said, if you have any thoughts as to why the representatives of the Fiji First government do not want to appear on a platform such as Sashi Singh's Talking Point. We've had the likes of Mr. Graham Leong, who's appeared on the program. We've had Professor Biman Prasad. We've had Mr. Mahendrapal Chaudhry. We've had Mr. Sitiveni Rambuka. We've had Mr. Narumbe. We've had other political aspiring politicians as well. So it's a matter of fact that it's not that we lack credibility. We've had people on the show, and these are very credible people who have been prepared to come and face questions on things that are very, very topical, things that people want to know about. As I've said in the past, that Sashi Singh's Talking Point is a program where we ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to because Fijians want to know. So let's look at some other comments here. Dennis Owen Marshall says the cost of living in Fiji nowadays is very shocking, the worst of the worst. Dennis, I ask you a question. What do you think should be done to combat such a dilemma? What is your solution? Sometimes the best solution comes from the ordinary citizen, who at times they have better ideas than government altogether. Kanchan Charan says, Bulla, to both of you, keep up with the reporting facts, very important for the democratic process. Kanchan Charan, thank you very much. Kenny Tambudhabu says, all civil servants must vote FFP otherwise. Kenny, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by otherwise? Is that a threat to all civil servants? Even civil servants have a right to exercise their democratic right as to who they should choose to vote for. Okay, says here, Jimmy Morrell says, Tosomai, the People's Alliance and National Federation Party, Australian Labor Party is the new government 2022. Thank you. Yes, we know that. It'll be very interesting to see, Nikhil, what the cabinet makeup is going to be. In my line of work, one of the ministerial portfolios that we deal with on a regular basis is the Department of Home Affairs, Immigration. So any tips as to who you think is going to be the Minister for Immigration? There is talk that it could be, what's her name? Penny, just slipped my mind. It'll come back. Any tips, Nick, as to who will get the minister?
Yes, Sashi. So I think what has been confirmed by Anthony Albanese is that, of course, he'll be sworn in on Monday, and together with him, he will take 4 of his senior front bench colleagues to be sworn in. So in terms of who will hold the respective portfolios, I think that is something that Albanese will be working throughout this weekend. But as you mentioned, I think Penny Wong is all but confirmed as the Foreign Affairs Minister. And in terms of the Immigration Minister, I think that's something that we'll have to wait and see, Sashi. But it's an interesting one because Christina Kennelly, who was a senator, she held the portfolio of shadow immigration. Now she has lost her seat. So that is something that'll be, I imagine there'll be a bit of a reshuffle in the Labour front bench, and somebody will come up with holding the portfolio of immigration and citizenship. But I think, the 4 senior portfolios, I would throw in the mix Richard Miles, who's the deputy party leader. He will be confirmed as the Minister for National Reconstruction, Employment and Small Business. Jim Chalmers will be the next treasurer of Australia. But going back to your question, the immigration portfolio, it's all up in the air now, given Christina Kennelly, who was the shadow minister, has lost her seat.
Okay, well, we'll keep watching. I sent you a little message. I hope you've seen that message. And by the way, I am reliably informed, and you can confirm this, that you got a call at 1 in the morning, a phone call.
I did get a call at around about 1 in the morning from a politician. I will not reveal who, Sashi, but I was quite amazed that at that time of the hour I got a call from somebody who acknowledged the work that me and my colleagues have done. So I was pretty stoked.
Indeed. Well, if you don't want to divulge the name, I won't. But I think it was a wonderful gesture on his part to call you, albeit at 1 in the morning, to appreciate the work you and your team have been doing for the Labour Party. All right. Well, going back to some more comments here, Michael Makasiale says no announcement on the participation of international election observers in Fiji elections for 2022. This is important for our elections to be deemed free and fair and creditable. Well, Michael, it just is a waiting game, I guess. One needs to know when the election's going to be announced. It can be any time between July of this year to January of 2023. Now, I've observed from where I am that the government machinery, in terms of publicity, in terms of campaigning, has also started, and it seems that elections will be announced sometime shortly. All right, going back onto some more comments. Samu Turangavati says, Bulavinaka Sashi, hope Fiji will take its cue from Australia in the way they conduct the election soon coming. Well, thank you very much, Samu. One certainly hopes that Fiji will take its cue. And look, we've had an election here in Australia last night. The Prime Minister that was conceded defeat, and there's going to be a transition of power. And in a country like Australia, these things happen. It's a must. There's no two ways about it. There's no intervention. There's no military risk. There's no coups, etc. And it's part of the democratic process. Yes, Mr. Makasiale, you make an interesting point. I guess that people will just have to wait until the election is announced before we have an overseas international observer group. But the other thing about international observer group, my views always is that it's not a junket that you travel to a country and just stand outside talking to people, shaking hands. You've got to be literally the eyes, ears, and mouthpiece of the democratic process. You've got to ensure that the whole election process, from the time the ballot papers are distributed to the time counting happens, that you are that policeman. You are the eyes and ears of the democratic process. Only then international observation groups are effective. Kirti Patel says NFP PAP is the way forward, the new government for sure. That's your view, Kirti. Appreciate your view. You have this forum to express your views. Jacinta Taylor says, Bulavinaka from Samoa, Sashi and Nikhil. Always interesting every Sunday to listen. Looking forward to Fiji's elections and hope a free and fair democratic elections happen. Always like to think Fiji could also take a little cue from Samoa's elections, where the courts decided free and fair. Breath of fresh air, hashtag breath of fresh air. Well said, Jacinta Taylor, and wonderful to have you join our show from Samoa. Today, a show with a difference where you can express your views. And let me just quickly check my notes here. I believe someone has sent me a message, and I'll get to that in just a moment. I have some other comments to look at, and I'm just trying to juggle two or three things together here. Let's see. Okay. All right. Yes, there was a news item that came out earlier, and Nikhil, I'll get your input into this. A former CRW soldier has now come out and thrown his support behind the Fiji First Party. You remember the story? This came out sometime this week.
I do, Sashi. I think it came out in the state-sponsored Fiji Broadcasting Corporation Commission, which you were a former employer of. I think there is some factual errors in that story. Firstly, I think the story is referring to a chap by the name of Madhu Nangiri, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's a couple of errors in that story. Firstly, Madhu is not a former CRW soldier. In fact, he was an employee of the Emperor Gold Mines. And I know Madhu personally. He was a explosives expert at the Emperor Gold Mine, so he's not a CRW soldier. And his actual name is Madhu Navaka Suasua. So he has the FBC, is you have referred to, I think, indicates that Madhu has thrown his support to the ruling Fiji First Party. And in that story, it is mentioned that he kind of saw the light when Prime Minister Bainimarama visited Sydney at some stage, and that made him decide to return to Fiji. Again, that's an error, I would say, because knowing his situation quite well, Madhu had entered Australia and sought asylum. He had applied for asylum. The reason he left Australia is that his asylum application was rejected. So, I got to give it to the FBC, painting a good light of Madhu and saying that he's throwing support to the Fiji First Party. But I think they've got to fix some factual errors in that story.
All right. I like the way you started that. I was a former employee. Yes, you can rub that in. Those days were quite different to what it is now. I remember running talkback shows where I could exercise my journalistic freedom. My questions weren't authorized or weren't sugar-coated by anybody in the newsroom or even in the general manager's office. Things were quite different then. Nikhil, one of the viewers, Malika Nasilivata, writes, media in Fiji is not free. It faces the threat if prosecution and hefty fines imposed under the media decree. I stand to be corrected. I believe media plays a very important role in the running of the nation. In your views as overseas journalists, how do you rate Fiji media reporting? Do you think our media is fair, unfair, or biased? Your views, Nikhil.
Well, Sashi, I think I'll leave my personal view aside because there is a lot of information and documentary from reputable organizations. We reported in our program last week the report from the media watchdog, the global media watchdog organization, Reporters Without Borders. I mean, they had ranked Fiji somewhere around, I think, quite severely or harshly, rather, when you talk about media freedom. So clearly, the experts believe that media is not, reporting is not done without fear or favor in Fiji. There is some very severe penalties that are in existence under the media decree, and you have a MIDA, an organization called the MIDA, where they actually look at everything that you report on. Journalists are actually very fearful on what they write, so they think twice before what they write. And the penalties, as I said, the impunity measures are quite severe: 7 years imprisonment and quite a hefty fine. Fiji Times went through a trial where the editor-in-chief, Fred Wesley, and I believe the managing director had to go through the process after facing prosecution under those laws. But that raises the question, Sashi. You have your constitution, as you say. Why then have decrees on the side? You probably can have one, but why both?
Let me try and get my couple of cents worth in this as well. to answer Milika's question, whether, how do we rate Fiji media reporting? Do you think media is fair, unfair, or biased? Well, the way to approach it is if you look at a print like the Fiji Sun, it has been exposed not once but many times that Fiji Sun has manipulated, for example, the Western Force and Fiji Sun polls in terms of the elections. So, and also it has been well documented that a print like Fiji Sun has in fact become the mouthpiece of the government. So, in terms of that, you can easily see that that is biased reporting. However, on the flip side of the coin, I have a number of friends who are journalists in Fiji, and I really feel for them because they are curtailed in what they do. They are curtailed in how they can write stories. If you turn the clock back, say 10, well, no, you've got to turn the clock back more than 16 years. Turn the clock back 20 years ago. Leading up to the elections, you would have robust news articles. You would be looking forward to buying the morning newspaper because it would definitely have something out of investigative journalism, etc. And, it was a must to buy your morning Fiji Times, for example, or the afternoon's Fiji Sun. But as I said, I feel for the journalists in Fiji, for some very, very good journalists. I know for a fact, and this has been revealed to me recently, that let's rephrase this. Yeah, it has been revealed to me that certain newspaper articles, etc., are vetted by lawyers. After the editorial staff have done their editing, it goes to a team of lawyers, and the lawyers go through each and every sentence, each and every paragraph to make sure that it doesn't turn around and bite the newspaper company in the behind with court actions or fines and whatever. So you can well imagine how difficult it is in the life of a journalist in Fiji. With us, through the power of Facebook and through the power of YouTube, we do this program without fear or sanction. And that is the beauty of hosting a program like this. Now, get back to the comments again. Naresh Kumar is watching. Hello, Naresh. Gurmeet Singh, welcome to the program. Janendra Baldeo is watching. Thank you, Janand. Anit Singh is watching as well. John Dimuri says, observer groups have often confined themselves to the logistics of the exercise. They do not usually look into its inner workings. Joe, well said. In fact, I've always been critical of the observer groups because somehow it always seems that it's like a bloody junket, that, they go into a country and they're there for the duration of the election and then pack your bags and thank you very much for the hospitality and away we go. And Joe, I mean, if you are the Joe and the Muri that I believe you are, then of course you've been through the electoral process yourself and you'd know. Kenneth Zink writes, Bula Kenneth, nice to hear from you. Bula Sashi, perhaps we should invite an independent country like Australia to run the upcoming Fiji election. Well, look, Australia does so much to provide aid to the Pacific Island countries as well as Fiji. If and only if Australia was asked to provide that sort of support, I'm sure Australia would do that, and one can guarantee transparency and accountability at the same time. But no, there are fears that NADRA is still involved from Pakistan, and why, no one knows. Nikhil, you have an input into that?
Yes, Sashi, I think a couple of points. Absolutely vital to have international observer groups in elections in Fiji, given the history of the country. But I think it will be a futile exercise for these groups to be in Fiji if they do submit a report. And I'm taking you back to the recommendations that were made by the Multi-Observer National Group in 2014. And the point to be noted there is that not all of their recommendations have been accepted by the government. So you can have the group, you can have them observe. They will submit a report, but it's a futile exercise if you don't take the recommendations on board or you refuse to implement some of the recommendations. So we do have a changed electoral system. I think any government, for that matter, should observe the recommendations and move towards implementing it, because it only enhances and promotes the democratic process.
All right, good point made. Rocky Maharaj has written, Namaste Mbula Sashi, the Australian Labor Party won the election on bread and butter and work-related issues such as wages increase. Wondering if our people in Fiji are likely to take its cue from the Australian elections and vote for the party in Fiji which has workers' rights and true democracy as its core principles. No guessing which party I'm referring to, but labor rights in Fiji, no. Well, he's referring to the Fiji Labour Party, of course, and a good point that this was one election, Nikhil, where migration matters just did not become the main center point of the election debate. Mr. Albanese brought it down to the cost of living. It was bread and butter issues for once, and the other item on the agenda of the Labour Party was climate change. That also featured quite a lot in terms of young voters. Nikhil.
Well, Sashi, I think a few points there. Is climate change. In fact, to my surprise, I was in the electorate of Benelong during the day, and I was amazed with the number of people actually engaging with me on the subject of climate change. So that certainly had a role to play in the election results last night, I believe. Going back to the bread and butter issues, I think, look, the Labour Party in Fiji has always stood up for workers in the country, and the party remains committed to that cause, where they provide fairness and equity to and equality to the workers in Fiji. But again, you look at the laws. We had Felix Anthony, the General Secretary of the Fiji Trades Union Congress, sharing on this program the limitations and restrictions placed on trade unions on effectively operating in the country. The voice of the workers are being suppressed and oppressed. The right to protest, the right to hold rallies and marches are being denied. The ILO report, is we covered in the program, I think last week, Sashi, does make mention of the government's, the government's restrictions on such rights of the workers, some fundamental rights that, in fact, I take for granted in this country. So they are severely curtailed in Fiji. Of course, bread and butter issues, Albanese did go out quite strongly. Interesting to note about the immigration policy, Shashi, the government refused to talk about immigration, saying, including, the arrival of people on boats and so forth, all the while saying these are on-water matters and they're not to be discussed publicly. But we saw even yesterday Morrison trying his best to reveal some details that were otherwise on-water matters, just to sway some voters. That certainly did not work.
All right, going back to the comment section, Aarti Devika Sharma is watching. Sharmila Singh is watching. Thank you. Welcome to the program. Sailen Singh says, excellent program. Naresh Kumar says, hello, my lovely team. Thank you, Naresh. Wonderful for your support. Joan Dimuri, yes, thank you. I've read your comment, Joe. I'll leave it there. Matani Ndenga Gam says, I believe that international election observers should not be from Australia or New Zealand, given how closely these countries visit government to the current administration. Are you trying to suggest that observers from Australia or New Zealand will be unethical? Is that what are you trying to say? Let me say I don't agree with you. if Australia and New Zealand participated as a part of the International Observer Group, well, you can bet your bottom dollar that accountability, transparency will be definitely practiced as well. Samu Turangavati says, Sashi, it will be prudent of the international observers to test the election process first for credibility. Do that first before they monitor the election. Well, I wonder how logistics will work out for that, Samu, but I appreciate your point. And I am just waiting to see when the announcement is going to be made by the government of the day as to when the elections are going to be held. And right now, for political parties, the part of the rules of the game is so dicey. It is so fearful of what you can say and do. The costing part of the exercise, wow, it just leaves a lot to be desired, I guess. On one side, you can ask for accountability in terms of costing, but on the other side, what happens if the arbiter does not agree with your costing and then challenges that? And the other thing, of course, now we have in Fiji what is known as the FICAC court, the corruption court. That is in full swing as well. And Nikhil, if you look at it, the 2006 coup was supposed to have taken place because someone wanted to get rid of corruption in Fiji. And it has taken so many years for finally for a corruption court to start with parliamentarians. Now, I have not seen, and I stand to be corrected, where people in power have been taken to task of because of corrupt dealings. I haven't seen other matters brought to light. So, what are your views, Nikhil?
Well, certainly, Sashi, a bit of in my view, selective, I guess, prosecution. I mean, the question that needs to be thrown at the government is what's happened to the investigation into the former Fiji Sugar Corporation Managing Director, Abdul Khan. He is alleged to have siphoned off millions of dollars. In 2019, the Prime Minister said the investigations were continuing. There's got to be some very detailed investigation given it's 2022 now. We don't have a report or progress on the investigation yet. We have, I think, politicians being sent in on administrative matters, in my view. So the one about the Fiji Sugar Corporation is quite an interesting one because I'm talking about tens of millions of dollars being siphoned off the corporation. And we do have a person of interest who has been alleged to have done that, but there's no resolution or report on the progress of that investigation. So I wonder what FICAC is doing on that, and this is why I think questions arise about FICAC being quite selective. So I stand corrected unless FICAC has got a report on Mr. Abdul Khan. Sachi, you referred about costings and how political parties are now restricted, or rather not restricted. They've got to be very careful on campaign promises. If they, if one of those parties go and hold a meeting and say they want to build a bridge, they've got to then demonstrate where the money is going to come from, how they will fund that, and if they can't, then what's the alternative? Now, that is all well and good, provided you have the functionality of those kind of processes. If if they're comparing to Australia, as you would be aware, Australia's got an independent costing agency. The Treasury has got a department where any party can submit their policies and it'll be costed for them independently. So in Fiji, you don't have that mechanism. And the opposition does not have the full books because the only one who knows how much money is in the coffers, which I don't believe there's much, is the government. So it's not a level playing field in my observation that parties that are required to adhere to that. Who's the arbitrator, the person who makes the decision, as you pointed out? Well, no one knows. There's an act that is in place, but who do you submit the report to? Who makes the decision? As we've covered in the program previously, is anybody's guess.
Well, you see, the one of the dangers is that you get Dracula to be in charge of the blood bank. Um, it's something that really is of great concern. Now, as you say quite correctly, in Australia we have that independent costing body that can cost matters for any political party. Now, in Fiji, and I want to ask this perhaps next week with our chief guest and other guests that are leaders of the political parties in Fiji, I will be putting that question to each one of them when they reappear in our program. Is something of a great worry because, as you said, that example of building a bridge. Say if the party says our costing is $1.2 million. Now, that's the party's actual costing in their estimate. Now, the arbiter can turn around and say, well, I don't agree with your costing. You're trying to tell porkies here. You're telling lies. The actual cost is going to be $1.8 million. You've undercosted. Is there a mechanism that's going to be there, like an appeal process or whatever? Or is it going to be a case where once the costing is not agreed to, that sanctions immediately come down on the basis of wrong costing? So we need to explore that. Now, maybe one of the best things that a political party can do is say nothing about programs that cost money. Just go into the elections with what you're doing right now, spread the message, get people to be registered, get people to vote, and just don't fall for the trap. There's a lot of people who are expecting the sword to drop at any time on, say, for example, Mr. Sitiveni Rambuka. And Mr. Rambuka has come out this week and said that in the event something happens in his party, his deputies know what to do and how to carry the work. Now, that in itself is quite a worry. We don't have that kind of worry when we go into elections in places like Australia and in New Zealand, etc. So, the coming months, a lot is going to be revealed, Nikhil.
Certainly, Sashi. I think you made a very good point about the repercussions of a party not getting right into the costings. I mean, you know what's going to be. It's going to be, oh, we got you on costings. Off you go to FICEC. That appears to be the way that things operate in Fiji. But as you say, the party should just probably not say anything. And I think the FLP is exercising that in some ways, where they have put out a preamble to their manifesto, where they are putting some general comments about the crippling debt in Fiji, about the social equality lacking, and the finances or the state of the economy. They're not making specific promises, and I believe that other major political parties, like the People's Alliance and the NFP, would probably be doing the same thing, not going to specifics, but making some very general comments or promises to the electorates.
All right. Nina Moreno writes, do you know if the Fiji Elections Office will be coming to USA to register? I downloaded the application online, but it needs a consul to witness my signature, but no one in San Francisco has responded. Don't really want to travel to Washington Embassy for a simple signature. Nina, if I may suggest, now, first of all, I don't know whether they're traveling to the USA. They finish their registrations in Sydney today. I'm told they fly off. Then registrations begin in New Zealand sometime next week. I'll put that on the SSTP page after the program today regarding registration in New Zealand. We'll find out about US, but Nina, may I suggest that you send an email to the Fiji Elections Office and ask them that question directly, and hopefully they get back to you. Mulo Tiger from Nandi says, vote for FLP to live in a healthy, wealthy life. Only MPC got the caliber to bring Fiji's standard high in the shortest period of time. We need better. easier, and secured election system together with the help of EU group of monitors. Mula Mula Tiger Nandi, thank you very much for your comment. And keep watching this program. Have something to reveal to you towards the end. Sunithra Mishra says, excellent program, sir. Sunithra, thank you very much. Welcome to the show. And hopefully you can be a long-time guest as well. Naresh
Sashi,
Kumar says, yes, Nikhil.
if I can jump in, I think there's a couple of comments that have referred to the field-led party. So I'd like to throw you a challenge at this point. Is you should invite the FLP leader on one of the programs on SSTP.
All right, I take that challenge up, Nikhil, and let's see how that eventuates. Indeed, Naresh Kumar says it's the neck and the news situation in terms of Fiji journalists. Naresh, depends which side of the coin you are on. If you work for the Fiji Sun and the Fiji Broadcasting Commission, you have no problems. But if you are with Communications Fiji Limited, if you work for the Fiji Times, indeed, you've got to watch what you write, what you say, and that's the neck and the news situation that you talk about. Api Bhavandra says top programs, Sashi. Vinava Lebu Api, thank you very much. Felipe Levadi is watching, great program. Felipe, hope you and the children are all well. Nice to have you along. Amit Swarup is watching. That's a name we both know, Nikhil. Amit is watching. Thank you, Amit. And Api Bhavandra writes, FICAC should be an independent body. Well, pigs will fly, I guess, if we're talking about independence. Talking of which, Nikhil, I found it strange. I found it, what's the word I'm looking for? Quite disconcerting. In the Nico Nawaikula case, the prosecutor, FICAC prosecutor, in his summing up, asked the court for the maximum sentence. Now, in cases, what a lawyer normally does, he says to the judge, Your Honor, the sentence in this particular matter ranges from A to Z. And we leave it to the discretion of the court to pass judgment as the court considers fit. But here we had this unique situation where the FICAC prosecutor actually recommended to the judge the sentence that should be given to Nico. And I found that strange, and some other people in the legal circles found that strange. Did you, Nikhil?
I absolutely did, Sashi. I think FICAC likes to play the role of the arbiter in these sort of cases. It goes back to the role of FICAC. If FICAC was independent, then we'll be seeing a lot more, I guess, prosecution on matters like the Rewa Dairy scam, on matters like the $33 million digger scam in Fiji with the water authority. No one's talking about this, but FICAC's turning a blind eye on this. Now, there may be not anything to prove in these cases, but they have not been through the usual process, as we have seen for matters like Nico Nawaikula and some of the other, I guess, prosecutions they have done. So it does beg the question, is this selective prosecution on the part of FICAC? It's a question that I think FICAC needs to answer. I have personally written to FICAC in preparation for our Sunday programs to get some answers, but on matters like the Rare Dairy and the $33 million digger alleged scam, not only I have not received a response, I've never received an acknowledgement of my email to FICAC.
And you'll be waiting and waiting and waiting because it's quite insignificant if you are writing. Now, we've also discussed in this program previously that under the Act, there's a direct door entry of the FICAC general manager or CEO with the AG. The DPP, for instance, does not have to report to the Attorney General in any sense of the word. But with FICAC, it's quite different. And sometimes you wonder where the directives actually come from. And there's other cases right now. Ratu Suliano's case is being held, and we wait with a bated breath as to what the outcome of that is going to be. Nico's, of course, been jailed now for he's got to serve at least 2.5 years for his indiscretions. Let's go to the comments. Christian Rogers watching. Vijay Ram says, if the question is, if FFP loses, do you believe there is going to be a smooth transition of power, or do you think there is a plan B? Well, we've discussed this, Vijay Ram. In the past, we've discussed this with a number of people. And the worrying thing about the Fiji constitution, under the section of the Fiji military forces, is that part which says that the military forces is responsible for the well-being of Fiji and of all Fijians. Now, the simple part to this equation would be that if there is a change of government, then the military would be well advised to accept the mandate of the people of Fiji and to ensure that there is a smooth transition of power without any military action in the adverse. That would be the accepted norm. Now, the other party or the other part to this whole equation is that should the military act in some way which is contrary to accepted norms, then there could be reprisals in the aids to Fiji from countries like Australia and New Zealand, the bipartisanship of military exercises, naval exercises. These things could all be affected as well. So again, time will tell as to what the mood and what the situation with the military forces are. I have been talking to someone in the military on Friday, long chats with that person. I won't name that person, but I hope to get someone from the military or a former military person on the show, hopefully sometime very soon. Going back to the comments, Nithya Reddy is watching. Hello, Nithya. Hope you're feeling well from your COVID attack. Nithya writes, Sashi and Nikhil, you guys are the twin game changers of Fijian politics. Democracy depends on brave journalists like you two. Well, thank you, Nithya, for your comments. And yes, Atish Prasad says, smooth transition of power in Australia at the moment. Interesting, too, if this is possible in Fiji, is the current admin cannot gain majority, or if the current admin. Well, the votes will decide. And don't forget, when elections are going to be held in Fiji, the whole world will be watching. And, last elections, remember there was a 48-hour blackout. And the rumor mill just went out of control. And one just hopes that it doesn't happen. Remember that blackout, Nikhil?
I certainly do. I certainly do. A lot of questions being asked as to what is happening during that period. So it does raise eyebrows when that happens, rightfully so.
All right, we'll keep going for a few more minutes in the absence of a chief guest today. We've done this pretty well, Nikhil. Thank you for supporting me in our show today. Elizabeth Fong writes, Bulanaka Sashi, and I add to the many thank yous for SSTP. The election is approaching, and the FFP's treatment of the USP defies all logic, as Fijian students are voters, not to mention alumni, many of whom are civil servants. What do you think FFP has up its sleeve to win the election, give this treatment of such an influential group of voters? Then there are the many other groups like trade union members, the unemployed who are offended by the FFP government's treatment of their needs. Well, Elizabeth, in one of the programs, one of my guests boldly declared that USP has something like 20,000 voting students. And the actions of the Fiji First government in denying something like $60 odd million in funds, in grants to the USP, that the student bloc of votes can make a determination. Now, there is, I believe, a personal agenda at play as to why the USB has been denied funds. We are going to try again one of these days to get Professor Paul Aluwalia, the Vice Chancellor, to appear. I had made contact with Professor Aluwalia, but he was just in the process of moving from Australia to Samoa, and he requested that I give him some time to settle down. I think he's had that time, and I will certainly be in touch with the good professor in terms of participating in the show, so we can get a grip of things that's happening at the University of the South Pacific. Rocky Maharaj writes, Sashi, regarding NADRA, perhaps an inquiry to look into why NADRA, the National Authority Database Registration Authority, was chosen to monitor Fiji's previous elections. NADRA is under the control of the Interior Secretary of Pakistan that regulates government databases and statistically manages the sensitive registration of all citizens, according to Google. The question is why an intelligence agency with a known dubious record and based in Pakistan be monitoring the elections again when there is no formal diplomatic relations between Fiji and Pakistan. Excellent point made by you, Rocky Maharaj. And folks, these comments that I'm reading actually appears on the comment section of the SSTP page, and you can read these comments yourself. Well, the question about NADRA, I believe in recent times, the supervisor of elections has come out and said that NADRA is not involved, and I stand to be corrected, but that is what I believe I recollect him saying. And but I also saw a photograph recently of the supervisor of elections shaking hands with a representative of NADRA, if I'm not wrong. So one wonders if NADRA is not involved in any capacity, why would a representative travel all the way to Fiji to shake hands with the supervisor of elections, unless it's some software development or something like that? Nikhil, I see you are shaking your head. Please do come in.
Yeah, I've seen that as well, Sashi. I think it is best left to the supervisor of elections to explain what is going on there. Obviously, and then there is certainly another photo that became quite popular where the supervisor of elections in a counting center in Suva was having a private discussion with the Attorney General. Now, that could well be the Attorney General, exchanging pleasantries with the supervisor of elections. That will maybe be the case, but the perception, the optics of that doesn't look good when you talk about independence. Sashi, the other thing that is making news in Fiji is the seizure of that Russian super yacht.
Amadeus.
Amadeus, yes, and it is in our hometown of Lautoka, where it is under guard. I think the reason why I mentioned it is because the DPP has revealed in court that it is costing the government somewhere around over $1 million a week, if I'm not mistaken. And the seizure has happened at the request of the US government. I think the question arises as to why the US government is not footing the bill. Why is it on an already depleted account of the Fiji government?
Well, that is so, and I believe I've read that the DPP has also said that the Attorney General is responsible for matters regarding the Amadeus, and that goes into his office. Raveen Gopal writes, Fiji is in a crisis. To get out of this crisis, we need good leaders to take this country forward. The people of Fiji need to see and think right, as some of our MP has sacrificed to be for our service. Look at Biman. He has sacrificed all his time for our country, leaving $150,000 pay from USP and down to $50,000 in Parliament. If he can sacrifice his time, why can't we sacrifice and vote for change and make our country great again? It'll take time, but we will flourish for sure when this change happens. Raveen Gopal, your comments, and you have the freedom to make those comments. Sacrifices is what sometimes political game is all about. It comes at a great, great cost to serve your country. But on the other side of the coin, if people are not careful, then politics itself can turn on its head. And that is where a whole game changer happens, where sacrifices are not made, but where other things happen. And you know what I'm talking about if you can read between the lines. Kamal Singh is watching. Thank you, Kamal. Vinesh Kumar says, great program. Sashi and Nikhil.
Sashi, if I can jump in, I think Ravin raises a really good point. If I am to just dissect his comments, similar to a couple of other comments that have come through, touching on bread and butter issues, what we have missed, and obviously this has not been reported in Fiji. Now, there is a level of bias in me on this subject because, as a workers' rights advocate, I tend to view these matters quite closely. But in the matter of the Fiji Airways, where, as you would recall, they had sacked hundreds of their employees, some via text message. What we have seen over the last few weeks is that they have advertised. So after the sackings a couple of years ago, they have now advertised for the same roles. Now the question is, why can't they simply pick up the phone and call Joe and say, "Hey, we sacked you, but guess what? We've got another role here opening. Come back." That is the question that needs to be asked. And we talk about these political parties about bread and butter issues. I think it'll be interesting to hear from them as to what do they intend to do. I take you back to 1999 when CAF had sacked some 500 employees. The FLP came out and said that if they were elected, they would reinstate those 500 people, and they had a camp known as Camp 500. Now, the FLP has made a similar, I guess, suggestion that should they come into government, they will ensure that these workers are looked after. I think we need similar assurances from the other major political party. The Fiji First has said nothing about this, but you have got these hundreds of workers from Fiji Airways sacked overnight, and then the company is now re-advertising. What's the game plan here? Are they trying to rehire people on a lesser salary, on less entitlements? That's something for, I think, Fiji Airways to answer. But certainly those workers are now without jobs and have been for a couple of years now.
It just makes common sense that why would you recruit a brand new team to take them through the training process when you retrenched workers, your flight stewards, your flight attendants, etc., who have already been trained and who've been sitting at home? Some are selling vegetables on the side of the road. I've read some stories of how they're trying to make ends meet. That you would, as you say, pick up the phone, get them back, a quick induction course, and Bob's your uncle, take the flying route and bring some happiness to the lives of people. But it just doesn't make sense as to how certain powers in Fiji behave the way they do. Nithya Reddy writes, one of the bottom line demands of the independence last night in Australia was the establishment of an anti-corruption and integrity commission. The Australian model seeks an honest institution rather than the Fiji FICAC, which is a blunt weapon of political persecution of Fiji First. Nithya Reddy, a good point. In fact, Nikhil, I remember Mr. Albanese kept on harping on this anti-corruption inquiry, anti-corruption being set up, the commission being set up at a federal level. Am I right in that?
You're absolutely on the money on that, Sashi. So Scott Morrison, after being attacked numerous times by the opposition, or the then opposition, I should say now, kept on saying that they had a legislation, a bill ready, a 345 or 78-page document. But there's two issues with that. The Scott Morrison government never tabled the bill in Parliament. They waited for the opposition to provide a bill, which is quite bizarre because Labor was not in government. The other piece to that subject is that Scott Morrison's proposal was, in effect, not an independent body, because a minister would decide if a matter has to go through the mechanisms of that integrity commission. So really, the minister has a call whether this should go out in the public domain or not, which is not really independent, open, and transparent process that Labor was trying to advocate for. Now, Albanese has said that he will introduce an integrity commission within 100 days of in office. So it'll be interesting to see. And the bill or the proposal is quite clear. They do want to replicate something like the New South Wales ICAC. So it'll be there for debate, I guess, in the first 100 days.
Well, I believe, and this is my personal opinion, I believe any body that is set up to have accountability, transparency, be a vigilant source for anti-corruption activities is good for the country. It's good for the politics of the country. And I fully support the establishment of an anti-corruption FICAC type, well, not FICAC, rather, our ICAC here at a federal level. Because, as you know, there have been a number of allegations leading up to this elections of so many type of frauds, etc. But the election is over. We'll leave those frauds aside. Perhaps for another 5 minutes, Nikhil will take some more of these comments, and then we'll call it a wrap for this afternoon. But don't go, because I've got to reveal who our chief guest is for next week, making a reappearance on SSTP. And this time, I guess, with a lot more to say, because there has been a lot of activity in Fiji in terms of politics. Now, Mr. Charanjit Singh, we acknowledged his presence earlier on this afternoon. I believe Mr. Singh has written, my information, the election will be in November. Well, Mr. Charanjit Singh, your guess is as good as mine. I believe the sooner we can get to the elections, the better it is going to be for the country, and the better for SSTP as well. So let's see. So you say November. I don't know what other people think. Time will tell. I guess only two people at this stage know as to when the election's going to be, and that's the Attorney General and perhaps the Prime Minister, or even the Speaker. I don't know. Now, Nandu Naidu says, my guess is the luxury yacht Amadeus will be let to sail free soon without an agenda. Well, time will tell. And Pushpakuni, thank you for watching. Prem Eagle says, let us quickly just... Prem Eagle says, and if a cyclone strikes Fiji during that time, then they will defer the election for some months so they can distribute food, clothes, and the aid money from overseas countries to the people. This will work for the Fiji First Party. Well, Prem, that's your observation. Let us see what happens. Well, Nikhil, it's been a pleasure having you for an extended version of your contribution to this afternoon show. I sincerely thank you for sticking around. We started at 11. It's getting on to 1:15 here in Sydney. And I've really enjoyed this session. It didn't come with the pressures that I normally go through when I have the chief guest. I've really got to be on the edge of my seat. We've had a fair selection of viewers who've stood by us, and I really thank our viewers for being part and parcel of today's program, even in the absence of a chief guest. So, Nikhil, thank you very much. I know you've got commitments this afternoon. Before you go, I have one kere from you. And now that the Labour Party is going to form the next government, and the reach and connection that you have, can I leave it to you to organize sometime at the Prime Minister, the incoming Prime Minister's convenience, an interview on SST with Mr. Albanese? I'm sure you can do that for us.
Thanks for returning the challenge that I gave you early in the program, Sashi. I'll certainly take that on, and I will do my utmost best to make that happen.
I will really, really appreciate that. And as for your challenge, keep listening. I know you're running late for your commitment. keep listening because I'm just about to read a couple more comments and I'll give the big reveal as to who our chief guest is next week. Perhaps this is where you should make that quick phone call. And I don't know whether you want to make that call or not, just to make sure that we're both on the right path. Anyway, Tivita Korandrau says, my mythical, I don't understand what you're saying. Rakesh and Saras Prasad says, excellent, thanks. Thank you, Rakesh and Saras. Wonderful to have you along in this program. Merseni Mbalelevuka writes, interesting program, Sashi, thank you. Well, Mariseni, without you, the program doesn't happen. Really, thank you for being part of this program as well. Eggy O'Connor, great session, Sashi and Nikhil. Thank you, Eggy. I've really enjoyed the session with Nikhil, talking about a number of things. Rakesh Raj, hello, Rakesh. Hi, he says, great program. Thank you, Rakesh. Sincerely appreciate that. Misake Loki Sivonivatu writes, Bula, Mr. Sashi, do you have any information on Pitendriti and Chone Balendroka and Droka, those involved in the military council or military affairs in 2006 coup? They would make good guests for you for this show. Well, as I said, I've been talking to somebody in the military this week, and we've exchanged a number of information, a lot of information rather, and hopefully somebody will come in soon to talk. Look, there's a section of our viewers who just do not like it when we talk of past coups, etc. But I believe that the logistics, some of the backstories in relation to what really happened in 2000, what really happened in 2006, these things have not come out in the open. And I believe that if we dig deep, the country needs to know, that Fijians need to know as to what really happened behind the scenes. Who is it that should be taken to task? And another point I make is that I believe that after the elections in Fiji, there has to be an independent inquiry on a number of different things, on a number of different subjects. There are very good minded people in Fiji who can be part of that independent inquiry, or even if people from overseas need to be roped in, then it has to happen. An independent inquiry, like I said, into a number of different facets of Fiji government life, and that inquiry is important for the people of Fiji. Chandrasekharan says, greatly utilize the opportunity, good time management, waiting for the chief guest to come next week. Chandrasekharan, in just a moment, I'll mention the guest for next week. Mesake says, Oratu Finau Mara, that would make a good guest. Well, okay, thank you, Mesake. Vijay Ram writes, thank you, gentlemen. Awesome program and giving your viewers the opportunity to put their questions through. Let's pray and hope for a beautiful Fiji free from fear. We need our freedom. Wonderful, wonderful indeed to express your thoughts, Vijay Ram. Thank you. Sandhya Narayan says, thank you for the great program. Thank you, Sandhya. Independent inquiry is a great idea, writes Mary Saini. Well, I believe, let's dig deep and let's show the nation what the truth of the matter is. Okay, well, look, thank you so very much for
Sashi,
all your... Yes, Nikhil.
There is I'm sorry to interrupt, somewhat a breaking news, which is in relation to Australian politics, but one of interest. Pauline Hanson, the leader of the One Nation Party, is on the verge of losing her seat. That is big news because Hanson has been in the mix for quite some time. She's a veteran politician, a senator, but I have just read that she is on the verge of losing her seat.
All right. Well, that's great breaking news from you, Nikhil. I knew you were up to something because I saw you scrolling on your phone, and I knew something was coming up. Well, look, thank you, champion. Enjoy your day. Have a wonderful day. You have been watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point on Facebook Live and on YouTube Live. As I say, we ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to. please follow and like the SSTP page if you have not done so. And let me now make that big reveal as to who my chief guest is going to be for next week. This gentleman has been around in Fiji politics for a very long, long time. He's making a reappearance on SSTP. I should have let you guys guess as to who the guest is going to be, but I won't do that now as we've run out of time. Our chief guest next week refers to, I refer to Nick Hill's challenge. He challenged to see whether we could get Mr. Mahendrapal Chaudhry on the show sometime soon. Well, let me say that I did speak with Mr. Chaudhry about 10 or 15 minutes before we began today's program, and Mr. Mahendra Chaudhry has kindly agreed to be our chief guest for next Sunday's program. The leader of the Fiji Labour Party, Mr. Mahendra Chaudhry, will be making his second appearance on the SSTP program. That's our chief guest for next week. I really look forward to talking to Mr. Chaudhry again on this platform, and I certainly hope that you will join us next Sunday for what promises to be a robust and interesting session with Mr. Mahendrapal Chaudhry, former Fiji Prime Minister, leader of the Fiji Labour Party. Well, viewers, thank you very, very much indeed. Somebody says yes, and somebody says good. All right, well, keep those comments coming. I certainly appreciate that. Look, I wish you all a very safe and a happy, happy week. In closing, as I do always, I leave you with this quote on the subject of elections. Todd Young said, "In each and every election, it is your rights, it is your freedoms, it is your interests that are on the ballot. In each and every election, it is your rights, it is your freedoms, it is your interests that are on the ballot." That quote from Todd Young. Well, that's it for today. And I didn't think that we would have such a long show today. I thought that we may finish in about 10 or 15 minutes. But thanks to you, we've had a show and a half, I guess. It's been a wonderful afternoon being with all of you. And once again, thanks for taking part in SSTP this afternoon. I am Sashi Singh bidding you goodbye, namaste, and ni samore. Goodbye, world.